While it is not considered canon, the special episode of Bardock serves itself as a story to illustrate how Frieza's great ancestors feared the Saiyans as Bardock defeated Chilled, and because of that, and Frieza being a descendant of Chilled, that is where the fear of the Super Saiyan came from. Because of this, Frieza decided to destroy the entire planet with the majority of the Saiyan inhabitants, as Dodoria tells Vegeta that Frieza thought the Saiyans were getting too strong for their own good. But if we do some basic power scaling, the honest truth of the matter is that if Frieza wasn't lazy, and even if Frieza was lazy, the Saiyans never stood a chance. And we are going to give one alternative that they could have used to theoretically destroy Frieza, but apart from this, nothing would work, and here's why. The first thing that we have to do is we have to power scale Bardock, and we're going to use the original TV special while also going back to Dragon Ball Minus and what we saw in Dragon Ball Super Broly to indicate how strong Bardock would theoretically be. But it is generally accepted that Bardock at his best was approximately 10,000. Now, we also have absolutely no idea how strong King Vegeta is, but we would just say for argumentative purposes that King Vegeta would be approximately 5,000. So let's just use those two numbers that are simple to just give a basic illustration as to how the Saiyans never stood a chance. So if Bardock were to theoretically transform into a Super Saiyan, that would mean that if he was truly a 10,000 and became a Super Saiyan, he would be approximately 500,000. Now you have to understand how hopeless this is. Bardock was considered one of the strongest Saiyans in that special after he got that Zenkai boost, if not the strongest Saiyan, and if we consider the fact that King Vegeta would be between 5,000 and 10,000 at that given point, that would mean at the absolute best case scenario that Bardock would be 500k and King Vegeta would be 250k, and considering the fact that King Vegeta is a king and he most likely wouldn't want to work with a Saiyan that is considered stronger than himself, all of this would make the argument that even if they were to theoretically fight together, they would stand absolutely no chance against Frieza, because what you have to understand is that even though Bardock would theoretically approximate Frieza in his base form, the second that Frieza transforms into any of his other forms, neither of them stand a chance. So the best case scenario for the Saiyans to have defeated Frieza would be to power up into a Super Saiyan theoretically and then defeat Frieza in his restricted form, because remember, Frieza's base form is really his restricted form because his true form is really his final form, but he uses the other weaker forms to control his energy. And you also have to remember something else here too, guys. We're doing all of this with the assumption that Bardock and King Vegeta were even able to transform into a Super Saiyan. There's this common notion in the Dragon Ball community that once you turn into a Super Saiyan, you gain so much power that you immediately defeat Frieza, but what you have to understand in this case is that they wouldn't even be stronger than Frieza in his restricted form, because Goku and Vegeta, if they had turned Super Saiyan like Goku did on planet Namek, they would have a chance to defeat Frieza because of the fact that their base form was already strong enough, so if you add a Super Saiyan transformation on top of this, they would have a chance. And I already did a video explaining how Vegeta would perform against Frieza for those who want to watch that. So from a power scaling point of view, even if we took who were deemed to be the strongest Saiyans and gave them Super Saiyan forms, they just somehow figured it out, they would stand no chance against Frieza directly. And this is just analyzing power. If we're thinking about it from a storytelling point of view, don't you think Frieza would have people on the inside that would know what the Saiyans were trying to do and what sort of rebellion they were forming? So even if they were organizing some type of plan, Frieza in all likelihood would have figured out a way through spying on their scouters or having scouts or something like that to understand what the Saiyan threat was, so the moment the Saiyans were actually thinking of some sort of rebellion, and if they did listen to Bardock, they were going to be screwed anyways, because by the time Bardock figured out what Frieza was going to do, it was already too late, and Frieza had already made up his mind that he was going to kill the Saiyans anyways. But remember, we're jumping to the front of the bus here because this is assuming we're talking about the Saiyans confronting Frieza directly. You also have to consider Frieza's henchmen. Now, remember what I said about the Super Saiyan form. The Super Saiyan form is an actual requirement for King Vegeta and Bardock to even have a chance against Frieza in his restricted form. But in their base forms, which we would assume they wouldn't have the Super Saiyan form, they wouldn't get past Frieza's henchmen. Because you have to remember that Dodoria was said to be about 23,000 and Zarbon was 24,000, and that's not even counting his monster form that went over 30,000. So if you're considering the fact that Dodoria and Zarbon are stronger than pretty much every Saiyan ever, this makes it even more impossible because we have to remember that Dodoria almost killed Bardock in the original TV special. In one blast, Dodoria can nearly kill who was perceived to be the strongest Saiyan at that given point during fighting the one-man rebellion against Frieza. So if we use that as a scale and scale all of the other Saiyans down, the Saiyans might be able to make some noise in defeating Frieza's henchmen and all of the weaker ones. But once it gets to characters like Dodoria and Zarbon and even Kui, because we have to remember that Kui was approximately the strength of Vegeta before he went to Earth and got a Zenkai boost and came back to Namek more powerful. So with this big three of upper henchmen of Frieza's, there's really no way that this would ever succeed. And this doesn't even count the Ginyu Force, because if the Ginyu Force gets involved in this, that makes the situation even more drastic, considering the fact that the Ginyu Force is even more powerful than them, and because of how they sync their fighting abilities together, this makes it almost impossible for any of the Saiyans to have gotten anywhere with this. And if any of them had any threat of ever approximating Frieza in strength, Captain Ginyu could always theoretically take their body for himself. And we also have to consider the fact that Dodoria, Zarbon, and Kui are all capable of destroying an entire planet. So a planet like Planet Vegeta could easily be destroyed because Kui was around the same strength as Vegeta before he got a Zenkai boost after fighting on Earth, and Vegeta would have destroyed the entire Earth had Goku not countered his attack with his Kamehameha during the whole Gallic Gun Beam clash. So for all those reasons, if the Saiyans banded together, they could make noise against the weaker henchmen, and they would also have to figure out everything earlier, but by the time they got to Zarbon, Dodoria, and Kui, Frieza would have been aware of what they were trying to do, so their plans would have been squashed. And then we also have to factor in that Frieza can survive in outer space. Now, the original Bardock TV special played with this idea as Bardock was in outer space, and Dragon Ball kind of plays with the rules of Saiyans breathing in outer space because Goku also fought Beerus in outer space. But the point is that if Frieza was ever really in danger, he could always go into deep space, and by going into deep space, he could get to a point where it would be harder for them to survive in outer space. But considering the fact that Frieza was so powerful, he wouldn't need to run and hide from a bunch of Saiyans who couldn't even beat his own henchmen. Now, there's another theory that fans have brought up, which was shown in a fan manga called Dragon Ball Multiverse, where all of the Saiyans decided to go into their Ozaru forms and kill Frieza before he could do anything, and they all combined themselves as Ozaru. Now, the thing that you have to understand about this is, even if they were to turn into an Ozaru, this wouldn't do anything against Frieza, because an Ozaru is a multiplier of only 10, so it's weaker than a Super Saiyan, and less controlled, because we assume only certain select Saiyans can fully control the Ozaru form. So as a result of this, the Ozaru transformation wouldn't work either, because even against a restricted Frieza, the attacks would be like flies hitting Frieza in the face, and the reason we can say that is because of the fact that Frieza fought against Nail, who had a power level of 42,000, and trust me guys, I don't like using power levels, but they are somewhat of a moderate reference point in indicating how weak the Saiyans were compared to what the Saiyans were on Namek, because of the fact that if Nail has a power level of 42,000 and he could do absolutely nothing against Frieza in his restricted form and Frieza was toying with him, Nail would approximately be in the range of where King Vegeta would be if he turned into an Ozaru, because if we guesstimate that his power level is about 5,000 and then we multiply that by 10, that would make him at approximately 50,000, and in the case of Bardock, he would be at approximately 100,000, so he would be able to rival Captain Ginyu, but both of these characters would still be far below where Frieza would be if you consider the fact that all of the other Saiyans would be far below them. So if rivaling the mid-level Ginyu Force members and Ginyu is the best that you can do, then you have no shot against Frieza. So it gets exponentially worse, because the other Saiyans don't have the base of Goku and Vegeta. But when we also consider the fact that the form is temporary, and Frieza could also destroy the moon, because that's also something else you have to consider, Frieza or any of his henchmen can destroy a moon, then this idea wouldn't work either. And if they decided to create an artificial moon, this still wouldn't matter, because they still wouldn't be able to kill a character as powerful as Frieza or his top henchman. So yeah, it ain't gonna work. So at best, you would have one guy in Bardock who could rival the middle Ginyu Force members, but when you consider strength in numbers and the fact that there's only one Saiyan that could be that strong, the Saiyans would still be at a major disadvantage. And by disadvantage, we mean they would still stand no chance. So last but not least, guys, the one idea that I thought that could actually stand somewhat of a chance would be if the Saiyans somehow figured out that they needed to defeat Frieza early and had some sort of special mission to Zenkai hack one of their own members. And what you have to understand about this, guys, is that if they Zenkai hack themselves, sort of like what happened with Dende, where they could just beat themselves up and then just keep healing themselves so that they could get strong enough to fight Frieza, they're scaling themselves to Frieza in his restricted state. When you consider the fact that Frieza's power level is almost 200 times higher than what his restricted state is, when he goes into his final form, none of the Saiyans stand any chance at all. Now, as a post-edit, to make this situation even more dire and gloomy for the Saiyans, we also have to consider the fact that Frieza or his henchmen can pick up on this Saiyan power increasing itself through all of this Zenkai hacking. And if this was happening and Frieza thought that this particular Saiyan was a threat to himself, he could immediately get rid of the situation before it became a threat later if they were trying the secret mission theory. Because we have to remember that the Saiyans back then did not know how to suppress their energy like the characters that lived on Earth. So if they were doing this, they couldn't really hide themselves. And because they couldn't hide themselves, Frieza would notice it and the plan would be ruined. Because we have to remember the fact that Vegeta, after getting a major Zenkai boost and already being far stronger than any of the Saiyans of the past, was able to hold his own with Frieza in his restricted form, but he wasn't able to overpower him. So while Frieza may have been afraid of the Saiyans, all of this was in his head, because if he actually tried, none of them would have stood a chance.